try and draw the Japanese fleet down south from where they were so that we could engage them. But they refused to come out. We went as far north as almost the Solomon Islands, and we trailed our coats in front of them for a week or 10 days or so, and made our presence visibly felt. But there was no reaction from them at all. There was an odd submarine attack here and there, but nothing other than that. At the beginning of the war, and when the Japanese first entered it, I thought, well, you know, these are the great copyists. These are the people who've got no original thoughts in their heads as far as industrial activity is concerned, and that we'll see them off in no time at all. But events proved very much different. They had, at the beginning of their war, the best naval aircraft fighter that was in production at the time. They had the best torpedoes. Throughout the war, they had the best torpedoes. They had the best night sighting guns on their cruisers, which were far superior to the Americans and to ours. They had fast, capable warships, which had performances far in excess of anything that we believed they were capable of. And it came as a great shock.
Because we had HF radios and the Americans had VHF. Does it mean anything to you? It doesn't mean much to me. But VHF was in those days, I don't say undetectable, but directional wise difficult. Whereas HF was like, you know, Radio Luxembourg, the world could. So the Americans had all the fun, really. Took part in the invasion of New Georgia, I think. We were really blocked because the Americans were out of carriers. There were all these things being repaired after the Corals truck and all that jazz. And we and the Saratoga were the only thing that stood between the Japanese fleet and Australia. So it was very much a game of bluff. We swapped squadrons, went different ways, and so on and so forth, all to successfully, as it happened, bluff the Japs into thinking there were at least 4 carriers there. But I fell in the sea there. My engine pre-detonated on takeoff, and I was picked up and transferred to Saratoga, where I had a lovely 2 or 3 weeks with Admiral Ramsey, American admiral, so courteous. He used to get me up the bridge every day, you know. And I'd say, why don't we go and have a go at these fuckers? And he'd say, well, I'd like to, but we can't, we haven't got the power. And so,
now, there have been several accidents. Accidents not only to the pilots themselves, but you can imagine, all right, it's a normal working day, the aircraft have been out on patrol, they're coming back in. So I'm standing with my other friends, there'll be the armourer, wanting to find out if the guns are okay, there'll be the engine fellow making sure that the engine performed all right, there's the airframe fellow making sure that nothing had happened to the airframe. We're standing waiting for the pilot to come in, and as soon as he gets out of his cockpit, we grab him before he goes off to a debriefing exercise. So we're standing behind the barrier, okay, waiting for this particular aircraft to come in, and he came in, and he was just coming in, and all of a sudden, along the flight deck, we saw sparks. He had fired his guns, and we were standing at them. You had never seen such a scatter in all your life. We're diving all over the place, you know. If there'd been a rabbit hole, we would have dived down that. And he came in with his guns blazing. Nobody was hurt.
Obviously an accident.
Oh, well, to do that, there's a master switch, okay, for the guns. So the master switch has to be on. there is a switch, so I understand from my armourer friend, a switch for the starboard engine, for the starboard guns, and a switch for the port guns. They must have been on. And of course, finally, a switch on the joystick. So when he was coming in, you know, adjusting his approach, he pressed the button, and he scattered the whole lot. I assume, and so Wiltshire told me, that they're told before they come in, you know, this is routine. Knock off your master switch. When he'd done that, of course, it doesn't matter. He'd done everything. But he'd left them all on, and he was court-martialed. He left the ship when we got to San Diego later on. He left the ship and went straight back to the UK. That was that case. And another case, where I was concerned myself, when the aircraft come in and they pass the barrier and they have to go down the forward lift into the hangar, the wings fold, as you know. They have to fold to make space. The wings fold, which means that the guns are pointing to the deck, all right? Straight onto the deck. Now, this particular aircraft, I'd asked the pilot if everything was okay. He said yes. So all I had to do was there's a little hatch in the fuselage, stick my head through the hatch, wiggle around, make sure that the set is secure in its holdings, and that was that. While I was doing that, there was the most enormous explosions. I thought, Christ, the Japs have found us, you know. It was that sort of noise. And I pulled out, and there was blood pouring down my left arm. And it was the armourer who'd gone in to test things, and he'd done exactly what the pilot had done. He pulled the trigger, and he shot these guns into the deck. Well, the Victorious is armour-plated deck. And a bit of shrapnel had gone through the fuselage into my arm. Up here, well, no, nothing really. It looked worse than it actually was, you know. But this lad jumped out the cockpit and the blood was pouring out of him. He had several bits of shrapnel in him, and he had to go to the sick bay. And he was in the sick bay quite a while, and he was court-martialed, poor fellow, eventually, and sent home. But these are accidents that happen, and there's no explanation. It's just a split-second lack of concentration on their part. And I thought to myself, well, you know, is this the right job for me? Shot right, left and centre when minding my own business.
Where I was taking off in the morning for an AS patrol, and I didn't like the sound of the engine, and I tried to stop. I skidded down the deck all the way to the front of the bows, the side of the bows, and went in upside down into the water. And I had quite a struggle to get out. And anyway, I did get out, I wouldn't be here. And so did the crew, fortunately. And we were picked up by the Fanning, an American destroyer, and returned by Breach's buoy to the Victorious. But it was my most unpleasant experience. As far as I remember, the hood was open. You usually took off and landed with it open. But I started to move out, get out, and then I found my helmet was keeping me in. Now, in the British carriers, you have a join in the cable which you just pull. They didn't have it in the American one, so I had to find the end of a cable to pull it out, but I didn't want to do that. I thought I might panic, so I took the helmet off. And then I crawled out and found myself under a wing, unfortunately, still underwater, and absolutely gasping for breath. I hadn't even had time to hyperventilate, you see. It's just a sheer will you didn't breathe. At last I pulled myself to the surface and got this precious air into my lungs. And my observer was there already, and the air gunner popped up a moment later, fortunately. He injured himself slightly getting out. And there we sat, and after a while I found myself sinking. I had blown up my Mae West, but what I hadn't done was screw up the valve which you use for blowing it up, you see. So I lost all the air, and I hadn't got enough breath to blow it up again. But there's kapok in these Mae Wests, and it just keeps you floating, but not too high. So there I was, just waiting. We didn't give a thought to sharks, none at all. Didn't even think about them. And after a while, the fanning came up, and we were hauled aboard.
When we'd finished that, we went back to Noumea. At that particular time, the Americans announced that they had a new carrier coming down into the Pacific, the Essex, and our services were no longer required. So we hot-foot back to Honolulu, where we were bid a very fond farewell, very tearful farewell.
So we arrived back in Noumea, and it was farewell. And on the day we left, the American fleet opened up and formed a lane, and we went through the lane, and the band on the Saratoga, the Marine band on the Saratoga was knocking out in American style, "California, here we come," and we replied with Colonel Bogey, of course, having no sort of flair. Just as well they didn't know the words of Colonel Bogey that were being sung at the time. Yeah. Dramatic, really. You know, we lined the decks, and of course their sailors lined deck decks and would cheer each other and all this sort of thing. At the time, I just thought, what have we accomplished? But apparently they were quite happy that the raids had been. Well, this was the beginning, wasn't it, of the fall of Japan, I suppose. Knocking off these islands one by one. Anyhow, they played us out with. They knew where we were going. We didn't know where we were going because the Navy never tells you until the last minute where you're going. We knew we were leaving them, but we guessed we were going to California. We went to California via Pearl Harbor. We stayed there, I think it was 2 days at Pearl Harbor, and then went down to San Diego, into the Naval Yard at Norfolk, Virginia. That was quite interesting. We got in there, and we had to berth between two ships. And the only way, I mean, you can't park your aircraft carrier, you can park a car. So we needed 3 tugs to push the Victorious into the space. Now that was going well until we were getting nearer the jetty. And of course we have I think I mentioned before, we have a Royal Marine Band. And we were in a foreign country, so the Royal Marine Band, in a matter of courtesy, was playing away, and they were playing away at Liberty Bell, and everything was fine, until we got nearer and nearer and nearer. And there was a breakdown in communications because they could not hear for the band. And the band came marching down the flight. We were all lining, again, courtesy. We were lining the flight deck with the fleet air arm personnel, weren't doing anything else. But the people on shore couldn't hear. The captain couldn't hear from the tugs, and the tugs couldn't hear from the captain. So the captain leans out of we call it the island, which is the bridge, of course, on an aircraft carrier. He leans out, and the band was at that stage just opposite. So he leans out and he said, "Stop the band, Mr. Anderson." Mr. Anderson was a young lieutenant in the Royal Marines. He couldn't hear, of course, because the band was playing. So he turns around and marches back up again. Halfway up the flight deck, the commander thought he'd have a go. So he shouts, "Stop the band, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind." Mr. Anderson still couldn't hear him, so he kept on marching up and down. And they came back down the flight deck opposite the bridge, and the captain by this time was just doing his nut, and he leans out, and he shouts out, "Stop the bloody band, Mr. Anderson, before you have us in the middle of Texas." And of course, Mr. Anderson, the band wouldn't stop immediately. He had to go through the routine of the big drummer going bum, 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 and then the band stopped. And of course, all of us lining close by were in a state of laughter, which we daren't show, of course. So eventually we did 1 or 2 repairs and set off across the Atlantic. And a day and a half or so out of Norfolk, we were heading towards the UK, and I was down having to wash and brush up down below, and action station sounded. Apparently they'd got a warning from the Admiralty that there was a U-boat, Wolfpack, lying in the path. So that was action stations. Well, action stations, everyone has a job to do. My job was to be on the fire party in the hangar, on the starboard side of the hangar. So everybody had to get to their own particular as quick as possible. So I rushed up the ladder, and as I was rushing up the ladder, it was somebody's job to close the big hatch. So the hatch came crashing down, and it missed my head by about 3 inches. Another 3 inches, and I would have had a big dent, a muckle big dent in the top of my head. Once the hatch was down, because there's a little a wheel in the hatch. You turn the wheel, and it opens up and allows one body to go through at a time. So we escaped. And I thought to myself, I get off the ship because, you know, someone tried to kill me by shooting up the flight deck. Somebody tried to kill me, the armour tried to kill me when I was doing my work inside the aircraft. Now somebody's trying to knock my head off. It's time I left the ship.